The second and the final presentation for today's session is, the topic is the effect of bankruptcy reform on default risk of firms, evidence from India. It would be presented by Dr. Aishwarya Krishna and Dr. Jayadev M.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So my topic for the day is effect of bankruptcy reform on default risk of firms, evidence from India. In the last 10 years, about 90 countries have, done some sort of bankruptcy reform, and India is also one among them. So in 2016, as we have all been discussing from morning, IBC came into being. Now, the research question that we are asking in this paper is that what has been the impact of this legal reform on the economic distress of a firm? Okay, so that is the first question. And if it has increased, then what might be the reasons for that? If it has decreased, then what could be the reasons for that? So these are the two research questions that we are going to address in this paper. So let me just give you a background to how we came up to these questions. So in the year 2019, we got in the year 2020, we got MCA 21 data, and this was for all the firms starting from 2011 to 2020. So that's about 12 lakh firms. And then we sort of, decreased the number of firms to about 9 lakh based on the asset size. So we took all those firms with asset size greater than 1 crore. And then this study came as, a repercussion of that study. So where we did the bankruptcy prediction of all those firms, listed and unlisted, using machine learning models. Now, coming to the uniqueness of this study. So why is this study important? What is so unique about this study? So basically, effective credit rights improvement has majorly been studied for listed firms. Okay, and in the case of India, Bose, Philomeni, and Malik 2021 does it. And then there is another paper by Joes 2020. Those people also study for listed firms. And then till now, only developed markets were studied. And of course, we do have a few papers who are studying emerging markets as well. And then the studies majorly concentrate on variables from financial statements, to measure default risk. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to compare between listed firms and unlisted firms. Because of the enormity of the data that we possess, this study becomes extremely important. We are looking at, small firms as well, right? And then it is India focused, and we are also adding some governance variables. Now, what could be the governance variables that we are adding? For example, percentage increase in median remuneration of the directors of a firm. That's a governance variable. Then we are adding how many board meetings is a person, is a director attending. So the attendance of the director for all the board meetings. So that's another governance variable that we are adding. And various other governance variables, especially important 3 auditor level variables also we have added, thanks to the MCA 21 database. All right, so the motivation, why are we doing this? Mainly look at the ratio of downgrades to upgrades. This is a very important economic distress metric, right? So we collected this data from CMIE Prowess, wherein we have the ratings of all the rating agencies like CRISIL, CARE, etc., right? So we have taken all those downgrades to upgrades ratio, and we have plotted here, and you can see that this has sort of increased. And then one good thing is that post IBC, our score, the World Bank score for resolving insolvency has kind of increased. The red line that you see over here is for India. The green line is China, and there the blue and the purple line is for US and Japan. Right? So this comes from the World Bank data. Now, coming to the literature, so listed, unlisted, mainly all these firms, all the studies that we have kind of seen look at listed firms. Now, for example, Brazil, when it introduced its credit reform, that was in 2005, they found that greater the credit rights, lower would be the cost of debt. And then the Italy case, right? The Italy case, 2016 paper by Rodano. So they have stated that there is increase in credit demand. The interest rate has also increased after the reorganization reform, but the liquidation reform does not give the same result, right? And then the UK result, increased costs for borrowing, for proceedings. Now, all these studies, basically indicate that there is an increase in credit. Now, that becomes sort of an income side argument, okay? Now, India-specific studies. Now, let us look at some studies like the Visaria 2009 paper that looks at DRTs. And they say that there has been a positive effect on the probability of repayment. So that would be the probability of repayment has increased. And then there is another Vaughan, Lilienfeld, Mukherjee, and Visaria 2012. So increase in interest rates they are finding. WIG 2013, right? So they look at the Sarfazi Act, reduction in secured debt they found, right? And all these papers have, different sort of, results that they find. Now, coming to the hypotheses development. So what are we doing basically? We have adopted for the first research question that we are asking, what happens to the distress risk of firms post IBC? Has it increased? Has it decreased? Now, what is distress risk? That is another question that we have to address. So we measure distress risk by the logistic regression framework, and we have thrown in all sorts of variables into the equation, governance, be it geographical variables. So we have added even state level variables into this measure. So the distress IT, the left-hand side is basically taking 1, 0. So if it is a distressed firm, it takes 1. If it's a non-distressed firm, it takes 0. Now, how do we measure the 1 and the 0? That is basically the economic default, the rating default that all these firms are getting from the rating agencies. So if a rating agency gives a default rating, then it takes the value of 1. And more importantly, it's not only the rating agencies that we are looking at. So we have also integrated the TransUnion CIBIL database into our study. So the distress also takes 1 if you are a willful defaulter, okay? So we have basically rating default and willful default in the measure of distress risk. Then to look at why this has it happened because the debt structure has increased or decreased? So we also look at the IBC, how it has affected the leverage, and then we look at how it has affected the cost of borrowing. So again, as the previous presentation also carried out a similar sort of study, wherein they also look at the DID framework. Even I have also looked at the DID framework to test hypothesis 2 and hypothesis 3. But the first one is our major result, whether default risk has come down. Okay, so let's just look at the data set once before we go to the results. So what all have we integrated here? So starting from 2011 to 2020, we have about 5 types of filings in MCA, okay? So one is XBRL, another is IND AS, Another is AOC 4, 2018 to 20. The data structure is totally different when compared to AOC 4 of 2015 to 17. And then the 23 ACA and 23 AC starting from 2011 to 14. So this entire exercise of aggregating all the forms, the data of all the forms into one single data set is a big exercise because the variable names are different. So we had to do a lot of data crunching there. And then, of course, we have also integrated the market-related data. So if you are a listed firm, then obviously you have stock prices, you have volume traded. So all these data variables are also coming into picture if there is a listed firm. And then the rating defaults and, of course, the willful defaults. So these are also being aggregated into the data set. All right, so let's just look at the basic summary statistics. We have about 10,422 firm years, listed firm years, okay? And this is, of course, after cleaning. In fact, for many firms, the balance sheet was not balanced. The balance sheet, it was not balancing, right? The A is equal to L plus E equation was not balancing for many firms. And then for a lot of firms, simple auditor fees was negatively reported. So we had to do a lot of data cleaning to get it to this level. And as you can see, for listed firms, we have the default rates. 2012, it's about 4.12%. And as it goes on, the next highest that we are seeing is in 2016. And then, of course, it's coming down later. And then for the unlisted firms, we don't see very high default rates because the rating agencies and TransUnion Civil database are not following these unlisted firms. So these agencies are following just the listed firms, but that's why we are getting very few defaulted firms. But the good part is that we still have 7,637 defaults. That is exclusive default firms, okay? So the first time that you're defaulting, that is taken as your economic default. And then we have about 337 defaults in the listed category. So we have a good number. 7,600 is a good number to do this entire logistic regression. Okay, just to, so I have kind of merged all these databases, but why leave IBBI data? So let's do that as well, right? So let me just give you a sort of view about what happens if I get in IBBI data into the picture. Out of 443 CIRP filings that we have, only 205 have matched with our MCA data. This could probably because of the asset size filter that we have put in. And then the CIBIL plus IBBI. So we have merged TransUnion CIBIL database plus IBBI. So there as well, out of about 106 willful defaulters from 2016 to 20, we just get one firm that matches with IBBI data. Then ratings plus IBBI, we have 142 CIRP firms that are matching with the ratings data, out of which 110 have a default rating. So that's a good thing. So 110 default ratings out of 142 CIRP firms. And the rest of the firms, believe it or not, there are about 4 or 5 firms which have a AAA rating and a CIRP filing. A4 rating, A3 rating, and a CIRP filing. So that was very shocking when I did this sort of merger. Then rating upgrades and downgrades. Out of 138 firms, that is the CIRP firms who had rating downgrades or upgrades, we observed that 108 firms had a reaffirmation and just 80 were downgraded. So this is the entire big picture when we get in IBBI data into the picture. So, okay, very quickly, the univariate tests. We did the pre-IBC and post-IBC univariate tests. And we see that long-term leverage has actually come down post IBC. So the previous study that we saw, the previous paper, it showed that the leverage has increased, right? So the short-term leverage has also seen a decrease. Cost of credit, well, that has also decreased. But cost of credit, it gets ruled out when we do the DID framework. Okay, the tangibility of the firms has also come down. And very importantly, the probability of default, right? The probability of default has seen a very good decrease post IBC. So that we are going to test it in a multivariate framework. Okay, so the multivariate framework shows very clearly that the default risk has come down post IBC. IBC takes the value of 1 if it's more than 2016. So the year is more than 2016. So we see that in all the 3 models where we include state variables and when we include governance variables, I have not shown those results here just due to the paucity of time. So the default risk has reduced post IBC by 0.22% for the listed firms. And for the basic model, we use Altman's 1968 variables. And of course, this is the DID framework. I'll not explain the equation there, but we find that default into IBC, which is our main DID variable, showing a negative coefficient, which means that post IBC, the debt structure, that is the leverage, has come down. And look at the probability of default. So this is something that we estimated using logistic regression. And this is the time series average of all the firms. And this has clearly come down even post IBC. And for unlisted firms, again, the long-term leverage is showing a negative effect post IBC for unlisted firms. So this is the data which has about 8 lakh firms. Okay, so very quickly, let me just, so this is the logistic regression. Again, here the probability of default or the default risk of these firms have come down post IBC. Now, here as well, DID framework for unlisted firms. Again, default variable is showing, the default into IBC. So that variable is again showing positive for the unlisted firms. And very interestingly, the cost of borrowings is not showing significant effect at all for listed and for unlisted firms. So there has been no effect on cost of borrowing for listed as well as unlisted firms. So that is the major conclusion that we are drawing. And of course, for the question whether we have done the matching, propensity score matching, well, we didn't do the propensity score matching, but we have matched it based on the asset size and the industry, following Altman again. And we found that the results are robust to that as well. So just to conclude, for the listed firms, using logistic regression framework, we find that the default risk has actually reduced post IBC. So we measured the default risk using logistic regression. Expansion of creditor rights has decreased corporate borrowings of firms that have a default rating or is a willful defaulter. And then defaulted firms have a 0.8% higher cost of borrowings when compared to the non-defaulted firms. No effect of IBC is observed. So in both the cases, listed and unlisted, IBC is not showing any significant effect on the cost of borrowings. Default risk, again, for unlisted firms, very similar results. Default risk has reduced post IBC. In the basic model just uses the financial statement information. Of course, when we put in the governance variables as well, governance variables, also auditor level variables. So all these variables, even if we put that, the default risk is on a decreasing trend. And of course, IBC has decreased the corporate borrowing of unlisted firms also. And default firms have had a higher cost of borrowings when compared to the non-default firms, but effect of IBC is not observed. So that's it. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. You use some data of willful default.
Yes.
So what is the source for that?
TransUnion Sibyl database.
Willful default?
Yes. So we have taken all those willful defaulters above 1 crore. We didn't take the 25 lakh above because our data entirely we are taking only 1 crore above asset size.
Okay. Now
We
you've
scrape
also
it from the website.
you've also shown that this probability of default has come down.
Yes.
Could it also be that, as you see, generally banks and financial institutions have been more circumspect on corporate lending? So could it be because of that?
It could be. I don't know how to control for it.
Yeah. So it could be because of that.
It could be
If you
because-
generally see, this aversion to lending is there,
Right.
and most of the credit growth is on the retail side. So that could be one factor.
Yeah.
For
So in another presentation I attended, they were talking about a methodology to control for that as well.
yeah,
Something
so you can
called
think of
parallel
that
lending.
as a
I'll try
further
that out
research
as well.
project.
Yeah.
And finally, this cost of borrowing you are showing decline, but if you see,
Cost
have you?
of borrowing,
Yeah,
post
But,
IBC, no effect.
yeah, but you showed some decline in trade, isn't it? Cost of borrowing.
No, probability of default has come down, but cost of borrowing post IBC, I don't find any effect for listed and for unlisted firms.
Okay, fine then. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Aishwarya. Yeah, this side. Sorry, I'm thinking back. So thank you for this nice presentation. So I'm Sumit. I'm a PhD student here at IIMA. I don't work in this area, so I have a clarificatory question to you. I mean, so basically you are saying that IBC impacts the, the default risk, right? But I didn't get the mechanism through which the IBC can impact the default risk, because default risk will be governed by economic factors, right? Like the competition in the industry, or if the economy as a whole is doing bad, or industry as a whole is doing bad. So
Yeah,
I could not.
Actually, the same comment we got from the CEA when we presented these results to the former CEA rather, to Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam. He said, why have you not controlled for macro factors? You should have controlled for interest rates at the macro level. You should have controlled for the GDP growth rate. So we did that. So we found that the results are the same. So we have controlled for macro factors. And in fact, when we added interest rates as one of the control variables, that's when the cost of debt disappeared. The result on the cost of debt, till then, I was getting it to be coming down post IBC. But as soon as I added interest rate as a control variable, the effect sort of disappeared.
Can I give an explanation for that?
Yes, sir, sure.
So basically, what I see is that the law will not have any impact on the economic factors. See, inflation, the interest rates. IBC will not have any impact on that. What IBC as an economic law has impact in the behavior of the borrowers. So here comes your willful default. A less number of borrowers are defaulting willfully now. That may be the reason the default risk has come down. Not because of any economic factors. Because the people are fearing default because the assets will be taken away by the creditors. They lose control. That may be the reason why your default risk is coming down. Second aspect I would like to say is that have you also examined the cascading effect of defaults? Because once a company defaults, then their vendors, their suppliers, it defaults to others also. Then they further default to their vendors. There is a cascading effect on the economy, you understand?
That's a very good point, sir.
Yeah.
Because what I have done, I have taken, so once a company defaults, I took all the related parties of that company.
Yeah.
And then I sort of did a testing whether the other company that is a related party also defaults. And I found that there is
Yes.
a very...
Actually, we see in the normal life, because
Yeah.
as a banker, I see a lot of time.
Yeah.
Okay, if like NHI defaults on a EPC company, then that EPC company may be defaulting on 15 other vendors, and they are all our borrowers. So 16 borrowers default because one company has defaulted. So that also should be brought into the study.
MCA didn't give us the related parties of all these firms, so we had to take it from Provis.
And as regard these unlisted firms, these include the partnerships and proprietorship
Yes,
firms.
absolutely, everything. But asset size greater than 1 crore.
But regarding your suggestion that the cost of credit has not come down, I think there will be a lag. It will not come down immediately because there is a change of behavior now. If you today you see less probability of default, then that premium for default will go down gradually. So maybe after 3-4 years you will see that, not today. That is my view. Thank you. Good presentation.
So MCA database should be only for corporates, right? It should not cover partnership firms unless the LLPs.
Yes, sir. We have LLP firms.
Only LLPs, not unregistered partnership firms. Yeah.
That have a CIM.
Yeah. So only LLPs, basically LLPs and companies.
So you linked all the variables among the different reports.
Yes.
Oh, that's a very commendable effort. Yeah.
Hello, Aishwarya. Yeah, there is one last question for me. Actually, there is a suggestion from my side. Perhaps you have already covered it, but it is not actually very explicit in your presentation that you are comparing the listed firm and unlisted firms on various parameters, cost of borrowing and default risk. And this is your uniqueness to study. But you have actually not suggested that what motivated you to do this comparison. Just because you have access to this database, MCA, this large repository, is it that the motivation to do the this study, or if there is some your personal motivation to do that, then it has to come into picture. So that's
Sure. I mean,
so that will actually add to your study. That's what I suggest.
Yeah. So I mean, the answer to that question, first I studied the bankruptcy prediction for US firms. So that's where it all began. Then now it's, I'm concentrating on Indian firms. There. So we found a basic literature gap here. So till now, Sarfazi Act was studied, DRTs were studied. There was no explicit study for unlisted firms on IBC. That's one motivation that I would suggest I have.
Your motivation will help to understand what is the managerial implications to others.
Okay.
Because academic gap is there doesn't mean that it will translate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to the presentations and giving your valuable comments. Tea would be served outside, following which there is a data-driven insolvency research workshop, which would be held at the same auditorium. Thank you.